About 10 minutes ago, the credits rolled on a new game for me. It made me feel a lot of things at different times. Not all of these things were exclusively bad or good, some were in a strange in-between. It's not an easy task to explain the short version, so what do you say we take this story from the top? If you're a seasoned viewer of this channel, you probably know that I have two friends in particular who help me with the writing, art assets, and creation of these videos.
Hi, I write some of the scripts with Ross. I'm Elliot.
Nick is here too.
Nick and Elliot have been helping me out for a long time, but unfortunately in Elliot's case, from somewhat of a distance. He lives roughly 2 hours out of the city where Nick and I are from, so our communications are relegated to group chats, Xbox Live conversations, and exchanging material for the channel. And on that subject, Elliot and I are the two foremost writers for the videos. And coincidentally, we both seem to have very differing opinions on a lot of stuff. But that helps air out all possible holes in our scripts when we write, so it's sort of helpful in ways. He has told me many times how much he enjoys the Ninja Gaiden games, so I figured I should give them a try at some point. I let him know I was about to start playing Black, and he told me that we should go bigger. And I'm never against upping the ante, so the three of us hatched a plan to dedicate a weekend to bring Elliot down to our playing field and record my first blind playthrough of the entirety of Ninja Gaiden Black. And now, I finally finished it. And we have a humongous long play video of the whole thing on our Let's Play channel, and I have a review of my time with the game for this channel. So without further ado, let's dive in. Ninja Gaiden is a series that I know next to nothing about. I know that it's more or less put Team Ninja on the map. I know it's not a baby game, and I know that Yosuke Hayashi is one of the big masterminds behind it. But I know nothing of what happens in the game besides Ryu Hayabusa being the main character, and he's pretty, good at slinging a sword. I started off in this valley, and it was a good enough introduction to one of my favorite things about Ryu, his parkour. In fact, let's start there. Ryu is a ninja who, from what I got in the cutscenes, reincarnates after death and has become a very proficient little guy. He can run across and up most surfaces, even if I wasn't all that great at it at the beginning.
Oh, this is gonna be a treat.
Look, and if there are two vertical walls, he can execute the wall jump, which, along with all the other parkour maneuvers, are immensely satisfying to do. But if I had $1 for every time I started to talk to Ryu for not doing the parkour I wanted, I would be a very rich man. Ryu, stop. Thank you, Ryu. You're very good at this. Ryu.
Alright.
Off, Ryu. As far as combat goes, he is proficient with pretty much any kind of weapon he comes across. The guy's just another Master Chief whenever it comes to weaponry. It could be his first time picking this thing up, but he'll just immediately know how to start going all... The combat was much more involved and open to experimentation than what I thought it would be. If you have the chops for it, you can outright juggle your enemies with correct placement and execution. And using your projectile weapons such as shurikens, the bow, and other stuff, you can extend your combos. This is where I had the most fun. It was immensely satisfying to use my projectiles and parkour maneuvers to not only bring the flash and spectacle, but to be rewarded with big damage to the enemies because of this. In this regard alone, I think Ninja Gaiden deserves your time. If you have the skill and the patience to workshop your combos and cook up some new ones, you'll be rewarded and then some by these combat encounters. But I might be jumping the gun a bit there, so to be pedantic, I do think there are some very large issues with the combat as well. And there might not be much else for you here if the combat just isn't your thing outright. For starters, this game has a very simple setup whenever it comes to executing your combos for each weapon. It's the basic light attack and then mix it up with the heavy attacks for your preferred animations and hitboxes. And I enjoy this for the sake of having more combos at your disposal, and it's much easier to pull them off this way. The Force Unleashed is a good example of a game that has this very similar setup, and I love that game. So I know this is probably going to put me on the blacklist of a few Ninja Gaiden enthusiasts, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was just button mashing a hell of a lot. I knew that I was pulling off combos, and if I press X 2 or 3 times and finish it with a Y, it would lead to Ryu doing more damaging combos. But I felt like this became very mindless very quickly. It didn't feel like the combos were the focus. The focus seemed to be more along the lines of studying each enemy's patterns and anticipating to properly evade or counter with whichever combinations of buttons your brain felt like sending to your thumbs that time. In The Force Unleashed, you have the different combo mix-ups like lightning and the Force. When you weave these into your button presses, it has different effects on the enemies. If you electrocute them, they're stunned and they fall on the ground, and some Force extensions open them up for more juggles. I'm not saying I want this game to be just like The Force Unleashed. I'm saying that I would have loved to see even more combo potential within my moveset, and not just mindless decisions of which combo do I want to see after this opening. It would have been more of a cherry on top, not so much a necessity. And as much as I did like the variety of weapons, which is abundant, I only found multifaceted use for all of but 3 of these weapons. The Dragon Sword is obviously the default weapon, so it's amazing. It's very good for quickly weaving in and out of enemies, and you become most accustomed to using it throughout your adventure. Then I found the second highest amount of versatility from the Lunar Staff. Its combos took a moment to start up, but once they do, it's a damage dealer for sure. The rapid moves and longer than average strings also means that it's great for constantly taking out throwaway projectile enemies in situations that the sword isn't fast enough for. Then the next one is the Big Buster Sword. I don't remember its name, sorry. But if I'm being honest, it's not that it's one of those standout weapons to me. I just needed a heavier weapon for the bigger goons, and I liked its design when I picked it up and decided to continue on upgrading it. Its charged shockwave move has many uses, and it's the weapon that I finally beat the final boss with, so I'm grateful for that. But I also had other heavy weapons that probably would have been just as capable. The variety of these weapons provided for the sandbox didn't impress me, since the next one down in the tab can probably do very similar things. Speaking of the sandbox, the enemy variety was a little bit less than what I guess I expected, but that doesn't mean that I thought it was bad. There were enough in terms of variety to never keep me feeling like they were running out of new enemies to throw at me. I did always feel like I was looking at a new enemy and contemplating how to beat it, but I can't quite put my finger on why I just expected more types of enemies for such a big adventure. It could very well be the consequence of having seen and absorbed everything in such a condensed time frame. Or maybe it's got something to do with why I can't recall many of the enemies looking back. But I do think the enemies present a nice difficulty curve. The starting out enemies are aggressive and can mob you, but they don't necessarily overwhelm you right out the gate. It follows the typical enemy progression to start. You know, the basic enemy is introduced and in its upgraded forms keep getting swapped out continuously throughout your adventure. But luckily, there are also several variations of enemy, and they all bring something different to the table, even if some didn't exactly rub me the right way. The ninjas are great at having pretty much the same amount of options you have. Therefore, your challenge is just being able to, use those options better. But the soldier enemies are really annoying with their constant gunfire. The bats are extremely satisfying to take out in large clusters and reap all the extra benefits as a reward. However, the ghost fish go against everything the game seems to stand for. They latch onto you and gnaw away at your health. The only way to get them off of you is to just mash and destroy your X button for an hour. But if another fish latches on, you have to start mashing again, and this will happen a lot because they travel in such large flocks. I like having mob enemies that are satisfying to take out in big groups, but not when they're constantly stopping me dead in my tracks to make me take them out. Luckily, Elliot taught me that I can use a bit of a loop that they can't break into with the Dragon Sword. But I shouldn't have to rely on a silly continuous string of attacks like that to avoid such an obvious break in the game's pace. That's not a satisfying challenge to overcome, that's tedious. But luckily that was one of the more isolated frustrations. Elliot told me that these ghost fish basically replace bats in the harder difficulties, which is a nice seg for the masochist wanting to replay the game, but I still think they need to be a tad less intrusive. No, surprisingly, he continued to tell me that I was making very good progress in the game. I apparently picked up on things very quickly and was good at reading the enemy's attacks. But throughout my playthrough, I heard so many horror stories about a very certain boss who was so incredibly difficult. So as I went on my adventure, I encountered lots of bosses, most of which I really enjoyed. Alma, the big baddie that was constantly mentioned and echoed by Elliot, wasn't as terrible as I was led to believe. She took me down a couple 8 times or so, but she wasn't so bad once I found out the strategy. That's just how most of the game's bosses were, honestly. They were brick walls until you find that one brick that's the most exploitable and you hammer away at it. Whether that be an attack that leaves them open, a weapon that best suits the encounter, or a spell that works best for as many possible reasons, it's a joy to figure these things out. Most were really enjoyable, the right blend of challenge and fun for the majority of the time. But some of them, I have to say, really rubbed me the wrong way. It's a shame this game has to have such stellar combat and then have some boss encounters absolutely do nothing with it, and frankly piss me off on some occasions. But I would like to preface my critiques of the boss fights with this remark. So you have 2 options to manipulate the camera in this game. You can have it fixed and follow predetermined angles and pretty much be out of your hair. And if you need to see something that's out of view, you can move the right stick and activate a stationary first-person view to check out your surroundings with ease. But if you click down on the right stick, you can swap to a freely maneuverable camera. But, and here's the catch, it's inverted. Yes, I could have maybe gotten used to it, but I didn't feel like learning how to pat my head and rub my stomach simultaneously, because that's what it'd feel like with a normal scheme for my movement and an inverted one for my view. So I kept a more traditional camera. This led to even more problems though. If you'll recall in my Sekiro video, I called out the camera as being one of the biggest problems in the game. It went nuts when it interacted with walls, and enemies and bosses oftentimes could push you back into walls and induce this. Sekiro must have learned that from Ninja Gaiden Black. During most boss fights, you'll be in an arena that you will have to maneuver around and dodge the attacks of the boss. Some are better at this and have a fixed camera angle where you can see all that you need to, but when this game is set to the fixed camera, in these freeform bosses, the camera is at its absolute worst. I cannot stand the camera when it gets like this. These enemies are very aggressive and will constantly be flying and dashing back and forth across the arena trying to take you out. But in these arenas, there are triggers for the cameras to shift positions immediately. So, with no easing at all, the camera can just begin to jitter and make it completely impossible to see what's happening should they stand in these triggers. It's so frustrating when this happens, because most of these boss fights can be a bit of a walk to get back to, and just to start the encounter and immediately get wrecked because of poor camera programming, it's not fun. It's unacceptable to not be able to see what's supposed to be an intense battle, and it made me have to take breaks several times during the recording sessions. You do have the ability to press the right trigger to recenter the camera on a Ryu's back. It's a good tool that does a good job of alleviating some of the headache, but it's still very wishy-washy when it comes to some of the encounters. But wishy-washy won't cut it when going toe-to-toe with this game's bosses. Now, I think the majority of these bosses do a great job at being fun and presenting a really good challenge. The big laser guy was very comfortable yet fun to take down. The tutorial boss was incredibly satisfying to take out because he's probably one of the biggest beginner walls in the game. And the big baddie Alma, both of her forms, were a lot more fun than I thought she would be. There was one really familiar boss too, that being this guy on horseback who was a straight up copy of a boss in Sekiro, which was really cool. From even took some of the moves this guy uses here and uses them in Sekiro. And who doesn't love an Easter egg from something they love? But while on the topic of Sekiro, again, this game hosts some recycled boss that did kinda get old for me. You fight this hentai monster 3 times on the normal difficulty, and the worms bosses may use a different projectile, but they all still have the same fight with only minor differences. There were some gimmicky bosses, and those were a bit less entertaining. The Bone Dragon, for instance, was just a challenge of discovering that you had to jump over his tail and stay to the sides, so not too much challenge once you figure it out. But you know what I've never really been a fan of in this kind of game? Boss rushes. And this game has a substantial one at the very end. To be fair, I think you're allowed to rely pretty heavily on healing items before the gauntlet of bosses. I noticed that boss battles were fairly easy to make comebacks in when I had a full inventory of health replenishers to help me out.
Fuck off.
Didn't mean to use that.
Ross loses count of how many healing items he's used, so he just burned his Nimpo.
I just didn't have to be as careful when a trip to the menu could put me back at full health, and I could do this several times. But the encounters where I had to make do with my 1 health bar were much more tense. It didn't happen very often because, like I said, I was able to have elixirs at all points in time. But looking back on it, I think that might be the point of this boss rush at the end. You have to fight older but weaker bosses on the normal difficulty, and then a new boss with the worst camera in the game. This is a large string of fights I fought over and over with 1 small elixir, and I lost over and over. I gave up for a little bit, and then made the annoying trek across the overworld to a shop to stock myself full of healing items again. Then I came back and won it first try. So if you do decide to go through this game, try and wean yourself off of having a fallback inventory. But after that, it's on to another boss rush, but with completely new bosses, including the final boss. They were all really creative and fun bosses, if I'm being honest. But during the whole thing, it was such a different game, because I had to be so careful with my health. I made it through and was stuck at the final boss with no healing items. I fought him probably 15 times with the Dragon Sword and lost continuously. But then, I fought him twice with the Buster Sword, and I won. It was a good fight that was a great test of everything I had learned up until that point. But if you want a Class A example of a boss that's basically a huge middle finger to the consistency of the game, look no further than the tank boss. You have to take down 2 tanks with nothing but anti-tank arrows, and it's a good thing Elliot was there because I would have stopped here. I can't explain to you all how frustrating this fight is. In all the other fights, if you're skilled enough, you can perfect the fight and take no damage. But in this fight, you have to stand still to accurately shoot the bow. But uh-oh, the tank has a machine gunner that's constantly shooting, so you'll be taking chip damage a lot. And oh no, the whole time the cannon is tracking you to blow you away should you try and block the machine gun fire. But I guess I'll just stay on the move, but uh-oh, the auto-aiming for the bow makes me want to step on a baby until we both cry. So, I guess my best option is just to cheaply wait behind this box and stand here while I shoot him down and hope he doesn't get a hit on me. Everything about this fight is wrong to me. This game has demonstrated that it's about quick reflexes and reading my opponent's moves to appropriately counterattack. This fight has none of that stuff present. It's fully focused on an aspect of the game, the bow, that I think is one of the weaker parts of your toolkit. I didn't even want to give the next boss a try whenever Elliot told me that it's focused on the bow too. But if I absolutely had to give one saving grace to this fight, I guess the arena is spacious enough to run around and experiment before you realize you have to cheese it. And it looks pretty cool too. The light shining down gives a cool atmosphere to the area. And speaking of, I really dug the way this game looked in general. Everything was constructed well and all the textures look really nice. The way its environments are built is really superb and varied too. You see a lot of the main town you run around in because it's essentially a hub world that loops back around and interconnects a lot of the levels. That's very neat, and I hate making parallels to Dark Souls because this game is not similar at all, but that really reminds me of it, and Dark Souls 1 is probably objectively one of the more thoughtfully crafted worlds in recent memory, and Ninja Gaiden is certainly among its ranks in my opinion now. The characters themselves. I played quite a bit of DOA 2 back in the day on the Dreamcast, so I'm very familiar with Ryu and his ninja friends, especially Ayane. Let me tell y'all, there was no better framed shot than this one right here, and it's not because of the color choices. Although this scene of Ryu doing this nonsense is a close second. I can't decide if I like Alma's design or not. I feel like it's a little too complicated, and the golden pasties are just an odd touch. I did think her open head was cool looking when we see her after her first encounter though. Oh, I did feel sorry for Rachel though. Her face is never really good at emoting, and I don't know if maybe Team Ninja hadn't discovered their love for jiggling boobs yet, but these T-Taws never move or bounce or anything. It's sad honestly, and she deserves a refund because whoever did them did a terrible job. But everything, including the enemies and the environments, look great in action. If you want to talk favorite few aesthetics, probably the Strain Yard, the Realm of Darkness from Kingdom Hearts, and my favorite was definitely the Master Emerald Shrine. Side note, I was told by Elliot that a lot of these quirky graphical errors are exclusive to the Xbox One's emulation of this game. They aren't too distracting besides the underwater screen effect looking like an unfinished motion blur disaster, but they were all at least noticeable. I especially liked how all of Ryu's animations looked. The way he effortlessly wields all these weapons are really fun to watch, and it's so easy to get wrapped up and lose yourself in the combos when you see it start going off. All of the graphical effects such as the blurs from the swings, the blood, the impacts, the after images, and the Nimpo spells all helped make the battles a visual marvel every time. The sounds were all top-notch too. Good sound design is so important to me, and the pummeling and smashing never sounded dull. This past weekend with Nick and Elliot was a lot of fun. I haven't done something like this since I was a kid. Staying up all night for a whole weekend just to finish a game together has to be something I gather friends to do more often. As far as the game itself goes, I think it's worth your time. If you're a fan of challenging games and have yet to sit down with this one, I would definitely say give it a shot. The combat is a whole lot of fun to master. The traversal is pretty rewarding to experiment with, and the weapons give you much more experimentation than you could ever need. The game may have aged a bit, and some of the bosses are really asking a lot for you to finish them, but keep going to the end. Just keep trying. Mission mode is unlocked after the main campaign, and it's a collection of challenges with different weapons and ninpo recommended to you. It's really tough and well suited for a post-game challenge. It's best suited for those who truly want to get down and dirty with the inner workings of the combat systems, so give the game a shot if it sounds like your kind of thing. And if you want to see even more of me playing this game, you can check out our full 5-hour long play in the card up top, or with the card during the outro. And be sure to subscribe to the Let's Play channel if you're interested. I kinda want the videos to be more like podcasts that you can watch if you're so inclined. I like to listen to Let's Plays when I'm at work or on long car rides or just chilling out, so I think that's what I kinda want to produce myself. I also plan on releasing full compilations of old command prompt series on that channel. It'll be a slow drip, but they will hopefully come out steadily enough. The channel's link will be in the outro. And let me know if there's another game that you guys think we should dedicate another weekend to. We're always down for more suggestions. But anyway, I appreciate you for watching. So thanks for stopping by and have a great day.